Well, hello there and welcome to today's Special District Summit West. I'm Dustin Heisler. I'm Chief Innovation Officer for Government Technology Magazine, and I will be your host for today's summit. Thanks for joining us. We have a lot of stories, best practices, lessons learned, and many other things to share with you all today. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. All attendee microphones and video are turned off by default. However, you can use the chat function to communicate with your fellow attendees. Use this chat to share your own best practices, your own learnings, and we may even call some of them out during the event as we progress through all the content today. For those of you with questions, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of these as possible today, but if for some reason we're unable to get to your question, don't worry, we'll follow up with you post-event. For those of you that have been part of our Special Districts program in the past, welcome back. For those of you that are new, welcome. The Special Districts program is the only national program designed specifically for and by the over 38,000 special district entities across the country. This program was created in joint partnership with AT&T and Government Technology Magazine. It was designed to educate, to inspire, and to connect special districts from across the country so they could share innovations and learnings. You can learn more about this program at govtech.com/districts. Now, normally we'd be with you in person. So for those of you that have been with us in the past, we've gone across the country. We've been in cities all over the US. And last year we were in Anaheim, California, for those of you that were there. And this is part of kind of the new reality that we have, the new era that we're in. And so although we would love to be with you in person, we're taking all of our programming for the Special Districts program virtual. Over the last few months, we've hosted a number of virtual events. You can check those out at govtech.com/districts. We've aggregated all kinds of resources in response to COVID. You can also view those in our special COVID-19 section. And you can see what other peers are doing from California, Washington, Oregon, all over the United States and more. But today is about the West. Today is about the Western US. And we really wanted to focus the topic of our conversation really around what you're doing and how not just you're navigating this new era and how you're responding to COVID and all of that crisis, but where we go from here and how we move forward. So although COVID has challenged us across the country, it's also activated so many of you in your districts to triumph over that crisis, to rapidly adapt and to even come up with new models for funding and service delivery. So the theme for today is really about navigating the uncertainty of 2020 and preparing for what's next. And so we've got a lot of things in store and a lot of great leaders that are here to talk about what they're doing. And as I mentioned, you all have navigated this new era of change rapidly. We've been so inspired as we've looked editorially at what's happening across the country with just how special districts have stepped up to these new realities and are leading in crisis. We've seen not just the ability to take your employees and make them virtual and remote, but the ability to take your operations remote. We've seen libraries deploy, e-services and even library drop-offs. We've seen virtual park services and yoga and other things that have all become available and have been launched in response to this. We've also seen a lot of digital innovations across the country. So we know broadband and connectivity is incredibly important and has been really center stage. We've seen housing districts that have really looked at providing that access and providing funding for that access to those that need it most. We've also seen a lot of innovation around the Internet of Things and leveraging that IoT infrastructure to do contact tracing and a variety of new initiatives across the country. And we've even seen new models of delivery of services and funding. We know this is a fiscally constrained environment. There's radical uncertainties that exist. So it's been encouraging to see new tests with taxes for transit districts and a variety of new types of technologies that have been put in place. These are the types of innovations that we're going to need to go forward. But we also know that there's a set of challenges. We've got a lot of betas and pilots that we've put out that we have to respond to. We've got departments inside of our districts that have deployed new solutions that we have to bring together. We've got a workforce that has to adapt to this new reality. We have all kinds of new digital experiences that we use to communicate a lot of great information to the public that we have to start to integrate into how we operate going forward. And then we have this back to basics, broadband, connectivity, cybersecurity. How do these topics play into how we lead our districts forward? And then with our employees, many employees were shifted. They were given laptops for the first time. So how we reskill and prepare them and re-onboard these employees is going to be a major topic of conversation as we go forward. So today we're going to dive into all of that and more. We're going to start first by talking about what we've learned. We brought together some amazing panelists to do that. Then we're going to talk about how we reimagine the special district experience going forward, how we adapt our operations for this new reality. And then one thing that was really top of mind for our National Advisory Board is the future of leadership and management and how we lead in this new era. What are those critical skills that we need going forward? And then we're going to close with a brief keynote where I'm going to frame some of the bigger picture trends that we're seeing and what you should take note of over the decade to come going forward. So we've got an amazing first panel that's going to dive into responding to COVID-19 and the lessons that we've learned from it. And as I take a moment to introduce each of these panelists, I'm going to ask a quick poll question to all of you around how you have responded to COVID and what your greatest challenges are today. So you should see that poll now coming across. And as you see that, I'll take a moment to introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Jenna Famular. She's MCE's Communications Manager. Jenna works to share messages of MCE's mission and achievements in the community through various public engagements and press opportunities. She's been at MCE since 2016, helping enroll new communities and sharing information with customers to help them make the best energy choices for their lifestyles. She's worked with community advocates to launch Deep Green campaigns and spent time educating young learners about energy and the environment. Prior to her time in her district, she worked in the California Academy of Science and the Bronx Zoo as a public educator. She has a BS in marine biology from UC Santa Cruz and holds an MA in climate and society from Columbia University. Next up, we've got Randy Iwasaki. He's the executive director of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. He was appointed by the CCTA board April 16, 2010. And in his role as executive director, he manages the 0.5% sales tax program. The authority is also the congestion management agency, so he makes recommendations on how the state and federal transportation fund should be used in Contra Costa. Prior to his appointment as executive director, he was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger in August 2009 as the director of the California Department of Transportation. Randy serves on a number of national transportation panels and committees. He's received a number of awards, including the GovTech 25 Doers, Dreamers, and Drivers Award to recognize the hardest working and most innovative individuals in the public sector. He's got a Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from California Polytech State University, and he currently serves as the school's Engineering Industrial Advisory Board member. He's got a Master's of Science in Engineering from California State University, Fresno. Next up is David Leach. He's a principal architect with AT&T Public Sector Shared Services Organization. He works with AT&T account teams, client teams, and internal departments to develop strategic solutions for the AT&T government and education clients. He's got over 25 years experience and has worked with a number of agencies on communication, security technologies, productivity, and risk mitigation. So we've got a great group, lots of great experience, and let's see how you all responded to this poll. We'll share these results. Looks like the number one current challenge is the impact of revenues and expenses in a very tight, fiscally constrained environment. This is definitely something that we are seeing across the country as well. So with that, let's transition into our first panel. So Jenna and Randy and David, thanks so much for joining us, for carving some time out of your busy schedules. I've got a question first. I think we'll start with you, Jenna, just around COVID-19 and how it's impacted your district. How disruptive was this, initially, and what are you doing today to adapt to kind of where it's at?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I imagine most of the folks on here, it's been a pretty big shift. I think for MCE, we've sort of had the benefit of being a two-office, semi-remote organization for a while. We have an office in San Rafael and an office in Concord. And we had already been in the process of transitioning towards laptops and a little bit more flexibility in our workspaces. So that was just really greatly accelerated. We had about 4 days to get all of that done, get everybody equipped to work remote, and it's definitely been a shift. We really focus as an agency on being a part of our communities, and it's very difficult to do that when you're virtual. But we've adapted pretty well, and we are continuing to operate all of our employees really functioning the same way or similarly to how we were prior to COVID.
That's great. And Randy, I know, you've got a lot of things that you've been working on, and then COVID came. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how this also impacted Contra Costa and, the transit infrastructure and kind of what the impact is even to this day.
Thank you, Dustin, for inviting us to talk today. We are a staff of 20, now 19. So the pandemic caused a downturn in the economy, which affects us on two fronts. One, sales tax. We use sales tax to fund transportation projects and programs. And then we also use state gas tax, which the volumes plummeted, as you know, during the pandemic. And so the revenues from the excise tax on gasoline are way, way down. And then our transit operators in Contra Costa are probably down 85% in ridership. So fare box return is not what it should be. So just like the poll said, revenue has been a real big hit here in Contra Costa County. We're lucky from a project delivery perspective, though, is we have a very small staff. We contract out about 95% of our work. So we have a stable staffing number. And then what we do is we contract out. So we slow the private sector down on those projects that don't leverage other monies. And so if it's 100% funded out of sales tax, we're not going to be working on it in the future. And then we also do long range planning. That's mostly federally funded. And so that hasn't taken a real big hit yet. We still need to think ahead. We still need to develop the plans. I think in our case, we were lucky, and thank you for writing about it on a couple of occasions. We're a team that went paperless a few years ago, trying to save money, not prepare for a pandemic. And so we've implemented all laptops. Our laptops have microphones and cameras. We were set up virtually. We all SharePoint. We're in the cloud with all of our files. We can check the files out. And so on the project delivery side, you only have one set of plans, one set of specs that you're working on. We've gone with PrimeGov, eBuilder. Our whole now inspection program is done paperlessly, remotely. You can do numerous activities at the same time with an iPad. And then we've gone online bidding. And so we don't have any transition, nobody signing paper, nobody touching the same pen twice, and those kinds of things. So I think in our case, a program we call POP, Progress on Paperless, has really prepared us for this pandemic. And so the problems that we have now is communication, what's happening next. So it's more incumbent upon me now to make sure that I communicate properly on what's happening, what are we going to do next? We're not going to come back to the office until it's safe. And so those kind of things has been kind of elevated, the communication part, but the daily business activities, we were pretty prepared for that.
That's great. And I think, having that right foundation, is so critical. So I think, your paperless project really laid a lot of that infrastructure in place. So David, I want to bring you into the conversation. As I do that, I know some of you didn't see the results. So we're going to share those results again with everyone so you can kind of see how those broke down. And David, I know you work with special districts and, traditional state and local government agencies across the country. What have you seen from a national standpoint with special district response to COVID? Any commonalities across the country?
So really, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this process. A lot of what Randy said is what is kind of mirrored in what I've seen across the country, through my peers and through other parts of the business as well. So maybe just your normal state and city governments, is that the first phase was, how do we get access? We're more of a traditionally more of a closed type of network, right? And the people didn't work from home. The VPN was limited use. So the first part of it was, how do I get access, ubiquitous access into our systems? And then the next part that happens is, what and how do we deliver the right information? So Randy's, way down the road there, but other organizations, that first piece was, how do I increase connectivity? How do I do that for authorized users, right? How do I track them from a security standpoint? And then how do I give them access to the right applications? And are they still, can they still be productive with an application that may not have been designed to be, decentralized, maybe, I guess I'd say, from the main location. So, internet access, doing that secure, and then figuring out, Randy mentioned SharePoint. Is it one of the Teams products that are out there for collaboration? Is it Box? Is it Dropbox? How do we maintain some level of workflow? And so those are kind of the common things that have been going on, right? So first, how do I open up this internet? How do I then increase my security infrastructure to handle it? And then, how do I give my my workers access to what they need to have access to? And then when you have field workers put in too, right, and like water departments and things like that, how do I leverage IoT and other technologies to kind of take up the slack while this whole time dealing with various, employees that get sick, right, and are out for more than a normal amount of time. So that's kind of what we're seeing, similar to what Randy's doing.
That's great. So Jen, I want to bring you back in. And, I know that one of the stories that we talked about, in advance of this was just the fact that you had to shift your public meetings to a virtual environment. And that's a struggle that a lot of other districts had to face as well, because they didn't have the infrastructure in place. They didn't even have the policies or, the equipment in place. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did and the impact that it's had on your customers?
Yeah, so as a not-for-profit electric service provider, the community and hearing from our community members is a really big component of what we do. And this past year, earlier this year, we were enrolling new customers in unincorporated Solano County. So we had planned a series of public meetings and opportunities to get out about who we are and what we were going to be offering the community. And because the decision was made to move to remote, we had a meeting scheduled pretty soon after that. We had to very quickly make that pivot to, okay, we can't be in person. How do we reach as many folks as possible? In the past, we had taken advantage of Facebook Live during other community enrollments. So we were in person talking to customers and then streaming that live on Facebook so that folks who were at home, who maybe had kids to take care of or weren't able to attend that meeting at that particular time, could go and watch it later. So we were thinking to ourselves, okay, how do we sort of take that strategy and turn it into something viable from us being remote as well? So our administrative services team was great. Our IT team, they all sat down and we talked and figured out, okay, we can take advantage of Zoom. We can live stream on Facebook concurrently. We can put it up on our website. We can make a phone number available. So we provided a lot of options to our customers to say, okay, hey, you can log into Zoom. You can check it out on your social media. If you're less tech savvy, all you have to do is throw this URL into your computer, or you can just call in. So that strategy was really effective. And what it also meant was we were able to reach other folks by having it possible for these meetings to be viewed at different times. You didn't actually have to participate right at that time. So that was a really big decision that we made, and it was pretty successful. We saw approximately 100 to 300 views on each meeting afterwards. So people were getting the message. And what was great about that was we were able to test out that technology and then implement it for our board meetings as well. So our board, when they meet, they also are through that public forum, which, as I mentioned, is really important to us as a public agency, having the ability to continue to communicate with our customers.
That's amazing. And I know that's, plays such a critical role right now. We saw trust in government grow significantly, double digits in some of our benchmarks. So I think those types of steps really, helped people find, information that was critical. And, now is a new expectation for service delivery. So Randy, I've got a question for you. I know, we were talking about kind of the initial impact of COVID, and you mentioned that you were kind of leveraging the fact that people weren't driving to actually start to get some stuff done. Tell us what the last 6 months have looked like for your district.
So as I mentioned before, we focus in on project delivery, the commitments to the voters on our sales tax. And one of those projects is Interstate 680 southbound HOV lane. So we're widening Interstate 680 to bring in a 25-mile long express lane, HOV lane. And because traffic volumes went down so much, we were able to take advantage of that. We asked Caltrans, we administer construction on the state highway, so we're not like a lot of other agencies like ours. And so we'll take the risk, but with risk comes reward. So when the project is done early, you save a lot of money. In this case, we're saving the taxpayers a lot of money. So yesterday we broke ground, or we cut the ribbon on the opening 1 year early. And so this means that our CM firm, we contract out 90% of our work, doesn't have to be out there another year. they can go on to another project. And our contractor is buttoning up putting the final touches on the outsides of that project, but the lane is open. That means the taxpayers, the drivers, get the benefits of the lane a year earlier, which means your rate of return is that much greater. And so we were able to leverage a bad situation, at least in this case of the pandemic, but we're able to constructively utilize the results better. And so in California, we have a lot of earthquakes. So when I worked for Caltrans, we always used to say, take advantage of every bad situation, because there's a lot of good that's in there. You just can't see it unless you look for it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, that's kind of a key theme that we've seen with leveraging, kind of the chaos to get some stuff done. So David, I want to also bring you into this, and, you've not just helped districts navigate some of these challenges, from the industry side, but you're also seeing them kind of firsthand. What are some of those common things that you're seeing here, and how are you seeing districts overcome them?
So, they continue to be access related, excuse me, many times. So again, as the technology standpoint from the beginning was, how do we continue to operate? How do we continue to deliver the services we need to? But then as you work a little further along, what we've run into is, how do you do onboarding anymore? How do you screen employees that need to come back, the essential workers that have to come in and still work? How do you control that? As well as how do we talk about Zoom, and we talk about, different technologies that we can still connect with our citizens and so forth, but not everybody has the same access to the technology. So how do we provide technology and kind of some stopgap measures, at least initially, so that people can still have ubiquitous access to it? And that's really been solved. It's been very, very specific to different districts, and one may be an amnesty program, maybe to catch up on water bills. Others might be providing internet access with certain types of devices so that they can get to, say, different board meetings and vote and be part of that process. So nothing specific, except for a lot of creativity, a lot of work around sharing and collaboration. I've seen a lot of entities out there that maybe have been putting off migrating or doing a transformation of applications that they have, whether they're ERP type related. You want to do something that big in a short process, but kind of opening up to some of the technologies to help help work with some of the productivity. So one example was, I think it's one of the ports on the East Coast had to, because of the way that different funding and some of these grants had come in, they had to count vehicles, every vehicle that came across on a ferry, and that used to be a hand process where people would send in and do it, and then send in a bunch of spreadsheets and it ought to be consolidated. Well, they were testing, and we'll see if it gets deployed, but intelligent video systems to do video analytics that could count, because they already had the cameras in place, so it's really just a kind of a software implementation, but count those vehicles that came in, and now providing this information very quickly, very effectively. So each area has had to look at different technologies are out there, and many have had to just kind of take a leap. There's some of the ways that new technology be implemented kind of had to be sped up, and that was one of them.
So kind of final question for the panel is just around looking to the future. There's a lot of uncertainties that are ahead. Are there specific elements or tactics that you think are critical for special district leaders to leverage to better adapt and respond to whatever comes next, whatever that might be? Jenna, we'll start with you on this one.
I think one of the unique things about MCE is that we have the ability to adapt pretty quickly to some of these changes. We're a smaller organization, we're a not-for-profit. So a couple of the things that we've done this year, collections on bills, very closely with PG&E to make sure that customers had access to payment plans. We have a $6 million resiliency fund, the risk of power outages. And so that program has really accelerated with everything that's been going on. People are remaining at home more than expected. So we want to make sure that people have access to that critical power that they need. So there are a number of things that we already had in the works, but as Randy indicated earlier, you are able to start order. You can continue to serve your constituents or customers more effectively. And that's something that we've been really working on is, okay, here are the programs that we have, here are the programs that we've been planning, and how do we shift our priorities so that we can really support our customers during this very difficult time. And we've been lucky that we've had that opportunity to do that.
That's great. Randy, what about you? What's on your radar for the future, and what are some of those critical tactics?
I just want to say we have a very resilient team, and I'm very, very proud of the 19 people that we have here and what we're preparing for. So I asked them the other day, I said, hey, I got to give a speech at this event. I got to come up with some great ideas. So tell me what you like about what we're doing so far and what you don't like about what we're doing so far. And so the team gave me some very good ideas. And so polling your team about, is the equipment working? Are the policies in place? Do you feel comfortable? I think that's what we're working on in the future, is making sure we communicate what's happening, how it's going to work. I think that's very, very important. Your staff is the most valuable asset that you have. And far be it from me to make them come back to work and they get sick. So stay at home, take care of your kids. Let's get the work done. So that's never been an issue. The thing we are working on next, I think, is making sure that the team gets a break. I tell them, take vacation, take a day off, take 2 hours off, go out and do some gardening, because get away from this, because it is going to affect your outlook, and I do not want that to happen. And so that's why we have leave balances. So that's what we're working on, I think, as a team, is making sure that we revitalize ourselves every now and again, and just don't get so caught up in the work that you burn yourself out. And I think that's a very, very important part of this, because I have people that are in a great mood because their kids are taken care of, they're homeschooling them, and they can go to work and they can do their work. I think what we don't realize is you got to take a break still. And when we were in the office, you could get those breaks, and now you're on one call after another call. You don't have to travel anymore between calls. And so 8 hours really means 8 hours stacked. And so you have to make sure you have time to do your work and then revitalize yourself. That's what we're working on in the future.
Love those tactics. Well, final word goes to you, David.
Yeah, I guess I would say don't back down, right? So there's a number of technologies, processes, and systems you've put in place that have been put in place to react to the tactical piece, right? Oh my God, what do? We got to work from home. Well, now, vaccines are coming and antivirals are testing. All that's going really well, but there's going to be a period of time before all of this goes away, right? So now maybe thinking more towards ubiquitous access, transformation of, some of the things that were put in place, stopgap real quick. How can they integrate with your other systems? How can they adapt and make more pieces of the operational side available from a remote user or from a staffer that might be out in the field, right? So I guess if we thought January was normal, it's probably going to be quite a while before we get to that type, if we ever get back to that same thing. So the more that systems can be made securely available to employees, the better off you are, right? So like onboarding, I think I might have mentioned before. What do you do now when you start hiring people? How do you do the training? How do you do the paperwork? How do you do those types of things? Well, it's the distancing and so forth. But the more you can continue to be ready to have secure access to the different systems, then the better off you're going to be going forward.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our first what we've learned. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about the special district experience, and I'm going to provide another survey, quick survey for you to answer. And for this panel, I encourage you to also check out all of our panelist bios. I'm going to save time and just kind of give you a little highlight as to where they're from. David's going to be back from AT&T. We've got Katie that's going to be here she's a marketing and communication specialist for the Rancho Cordova Recreation and Park District. And then we also have Steve Towns, our Deputy Chief Content Officer, Government Technology Magazine, that will be moderating this panel as we dive into the importance of experience Also, highly encourage that you keep sharing what you're doing on the chat. Thanks so much to Erica, Natalia Romo, Sarah Thompson, Amy Crowder, Kimberly Ruiz, Kimberly Wall. Keep those insights coming. We're loving learning from you. And now let's share the results from this poll with the group. Looks like, new digital policy, procedures, and governance is the most deployed new thing for special districts. Great insights. Steve, I'll hand things over to you for this next panel.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. I am excited to be hosting a panel, so glad to be here. Katie, nice to meet you. Dave, nice to see you again. I've worked with the Special Districts program for the past, I guess, 3 years or so, and met a lot of great folks that are doing a lot of innovative things, and happy to be here today. So the digital experience for special districts has changed dramatically. I mean, we've heard a little bit about that in our first session, where, you know, these districts have had to kind of dramatically change how they interact with both citizens and employees to kind of meet these new conditions. I think for this panel, we want to dive in a little bit into how special districts are reimagining digital experience to meet the needs of both the current crisis and maybe what that means kind of looking out into the future for how you're going to deal with your customers and your other stakeholders and users. So Katie, let's dive right in. Let's talk a little bit about how you've had to change what you do. I mean, we've seen some really innovative examples, you know, out of recreation and parks districts when, you know, social distancing orders went into effect and, you know, programs were locked down and you couldn't do things the way you used to. Talk about what that meant for you guys and how you reacted.
Definitely. Well, first, thanks for having me. You know, it's been a really great learning experience, I think, for all of us in such a transition time that, you know, COVID has been for all of us. And really, you know, parks have kind of popped up as, you remember as a little kid that, you know, you had your favorite neighborhood park, right? Whether it was Dinosaur Park or what have you, just right around the corner, and you'd go with your friends all the time. And I think in, you know, the last maybe 10 years or so, with how much technology has made such a fun digital landscape for everyone, whether it's social media or just, you know, we've had such great movie theaters now that serve you food, right? And I think when everything closed down, people remembered that parks have always been there for you, and you can do a lot outdoors. You can go for just your walks with friends. You maybe can't join anyone for happy hour right now, but you can go out to a park and make your own picnic. And so a huge influx of, I guess, you know, community members, our customers, right, which are just our residents, coming in and realizing the services that we had. And it was just a great time for us to really showcase, you know, what we were providing our community. So we turned over a couple new leaves and started doing more recreation programming outside, doing a lot of digital promotion of our services as well, transitioning our what used to be a printed recreation guide into now a more bi-monthly digital publication where people can click and register online right through that PDF. You know, that's also saving trees, which is kind of part of the mission anyway, so we can save the trees for the parks, right? And then, you know, in addition, we were used to hosting a lot of community events, and it's been sad to not be able to really interact in person with our community. But we've done a couple different ways of still making sure that their input is coming to us, doing virtual outreach to our community and seeing what they want. If we have, you know, funds to put into some upgrades for a local park, we're making sure that we're getting that input from them, even if it's only going to be virtual. And then in addition, you know, we're still engaging on some of the major projects that we're doing and making sure that we're sharing that with our residents in our community. And I believe we'll be sending out a little email with our virtual groundbreaking for the big pool project that we have coming up, which was just one example of the many we've done to really transition everything so people can still feel included.
Katie, that's great. I think we'll come back to that virtual groundbreaking and maybe a little bit of the virtual outreach. Let me pull Dave into the conversation as well. Dave, as Dustin noted, I mean, you do work with districts nationwide, you know, to deploy new technology that's going to help them interact with citizens and customers virtually. Can you point to a few examples that you're seeing that are maybe standouts around how districts are optimizing this new experience?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's I guess communication technologies, right, and capabilities. So like Kate was just saying, digitizing, you know, some of the things that are on paper, making that more and easier to get access to. But I've also seen some things around you know, access itself that's even more productive. So there's so many of the board meetings have moved to video that there's been a number of areas that for like Board of Commissioners for funding or whatever the case might be, are recording those videos and having them, I don't even know what you call it. I mean, text would be OCRing it, right? But the systems now allow searchable capabilities, right? So they don't have to sit through a whole meeting to wait to get to the point they need to, you know, they want to have interest in, right? And go in and search and find areas that are important to them. Then the outreach programs that Katie was talking about are important. And then I've also seen even more operational type deployments of applications and capabilities on mobile devices and video. So I don't remember which area it was. There's a town in Florida that empowered their inspectors, their building inspectors, to have a video conference. And I don't remember what application it was they were using, but a video conference with contractors. So, you know, if somebody's going to put in a hot water heater, normally takes a few days, right, I guess, to get somebody back out there. Because of this, they then deployed this application where they could get online together, to the person, the contractor there could show the different things that he needed to do, what the environment looked like, and they could approve it and move on. So, and those are a couple of examples of, I guess, maybe, you know, happy accidents, right? As you start to open up some of the things the way you do it today, you start to realize, you know, how much better you can help some of our constituents, you know, at the same time while you're still maintaining what has to happen.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Katie, let's go back. I mean, you hinted at a couple of examples of how you've kind of engaged the community in new ways. One sounds like is a virtual groundbreaking that you held for a park. Can you tell us what you did there and kind of what the results you saw from that?
Of course. So we have normal groundbreaking events to celebrate the project's process. Whenever we are about to announce either a new park opening or, for example, for this one is a brand new aquatic complex and pool project that we will be unveiling in the summer of 2021. And now in normal circumstances, we would be inviting all of our elected officials to come out and break ground with us in person, as well as all of our community members, and would have, you know, a great big celebration. The safety of our community is of course, the most importance. And so we decided to still bring everyone in together, but we videoed all of our elected officials individually breaking ground at the site and compiled it to make it one big event that we could share digitally to our community so they could still feel like they were a part of it while maintaining the safety of everyone.
Talk about the impact that has. I mean, it lets you kind of maintain a little sense of normalcy, right? And a little sense of connection.
It definitely does. And it was fun to watch our elected officials also go through the process of, you know, wearing the masks, and with pride, maybe it's a specific mask that they had created to showcase their personality, right? And, you know, that golden shovel in the ground is always a really great moment for how hard they work to serve their community as well. And so it was great feedback that we received from everyone in regards to, you know, still having a momentous occasion. This project has been, you know, eagerly awaited from our community for the past few years, and just a, you know, a great moment to showcase that we are committed to our service and, you know, committed to making these moments a unifying occasion as well.
Yeah. Katie, one last thing. I know that you guys also, I think, have done some virtual outreach around park renovations. I mean, the things that I assume you would normally use a public meeting, face-to-face meetings for. Tell us briefly about that, and was it effective for you?
So we did have a a normal community outreach way about our service, right? Where we would bring everyone in and we'd have boards of, this is playground option A, please put your green sticker on the board of, whichever swing set you like better, right? And so what we ended up doing is providing a visual and a virtual way that the community could go through it, and we could survey their input and survey their comments to determine what they preferred. This is their neighborhood park. It's really about them. And so we put together a little video of our architects and park planners who kind of discussed what was going to be going into the park, and then showcased the options and allowed them to choose, and shared that via Nextdoor and Facebook, and also through a direct email contact list that we had of some of the residents. And we actually received the most input that we've ever received, where people maybe couldn't arrive at an in-person meeting because of picking up, kids from school or other commitments. And so it was great to really have the opportunity to have more input than maybe we normally would have received.
Yeah, really interesting. Dave, let me tap a little bit of your expertise here. Deploying and managing these new experiences is more than just launching a new application. There are, foundational elements, right? Cyber security, connectivity, cloud platforms that need to be in place to let you adapt this way. Can you talk about, at least in your opinion, what are the most critical elements to keep in mind as districts move in this direction?
Well, most critical is going to be around security, right? Every district, has to have, a policy in place, and I think, you don't want to, keep beating that rug, right? I mean, it's authentication and authorization, right? That's the focus on managing the risk that's increasing when you start having essentially your perimeter of the network just disappear, right? And how do I drive my policy through both process and technology, and then extend that into the cloud, right? So how do I know, my users, if this is an internal facing application, how do I know they're getting access to the correct, the correct piece of the application, right? So it's security, but it's more around, how do I drive policy and how do I continue to manage risk? For public facing, it's really, similar to some extent, but it's how do I get availability, making it efficient, easy to access, and really just basically either, continuing the processes and the foundational things we put in place already, reaching out, as I've seen on a number of the Q&A and so forth, collaboration with other, other districts to, hear what other organizations are doing to keep, a high level of availability of these applications, and to make sure that, that they're out there. From a security standpoint, there's also availability, right? So how are we making sure that, we don't promote something, implement it, show this transformation, and then everybody goes to it, and it gets knocked out of the sky, right? So really just a continuation of applying different tools that are there to continue with your policy.
Yeah, makes sense, David. Katie, we've got a question from the audience, if you don't mind answering one.
Sure.
We have people are wondering if your park district is working with any healthcare partners to do outdoor COVID testing or even flu shots or clinical services. Is that something you guys get involved in? And if so, what does that look like?
So because of the nature of our independent special district, we do work very closely with the city of Rancho Cordova, as it's one of the main communities that we serve. But we are, in the region of Sacramento County. So the Sacramento County Public Health Officer, all of those orders are what we are following. And whichever cities are within the district that we serve, most of them are doing a lot of public health testing. And so that's where those partnerships, come into play, where the city is really taking care of a lot of those health needs. And then we're following those instructions to make sure that our programming, whether it's virtual or outdoors, of course, follows social distancing measures, and we have increased sanitation practices and other implemented just precautionary measures to make sure that our community stays safe. But that's not necessarily something we directly do. It's more so through the cities that we work with.
Got it. You mentioned a little bit about how you're using kind of social platforms to connect with folks, and I'm wondering how you evaluate and kind of prioritize. I mean, there's so many platforms, right? There, Facebook, Snapchat, Nextdoor. How do you evaluate and prioritize which one is or ones are the right ones for you to use?
That was definitely a challenging question when I first arrived in this role. Our community is very diverse, and we have a couple different methods to reach, I would say, specific neighborhoods within our larger community. Our main focus has been Facebook, Nextdoor. Those are our two that seem to reach the most amount of residents and really have that interactivity that we're looking for to make sure that we are communicating with our community appropriately and that they're getting the information that we need. So beyond those two social platforms, our website is a huge hub of information. We have found that there isn't as much of a following, in comparison, I would say, on like our Instagram and Twitter, though we do continue to post important updates on those pages as well. Our Facebook and our Nextdoor are huge hubs of just constant communication back and forth with our community, and making sure that that's the first place everyone checks to find out if programs are happening, if a park is open, there's construction. So that took a little bit of research and some also community outreach to find out how they wanted to be communicated with. And then once we determined, what our community preferred, we dove right in and made sure that those were our top priority.
How did you evaluate which ones were working? Were there kind of effective metrics to say, oh, here's where we ought to put our resources, or here's where we need to put our attention?
Definitely was helpful to have this survey information. That really gave us an idea of who was responding as well. And, is that the group that we need to be getting this information out to? Facebook metrics have been very helpful, but we've also received actually a lot of direct emails. We always make sure that we put in our customer service email into almost everything that we post so that people can directly reach out to us with feedback. We've actually received a lot of great, detailed and written feedback from some of our community leaders, whether that's, a homeowners association who is also working to distribute that information to their residents and help kind of work with us. But connecting with a lot of those leaders has been helpful because then they will, share that information. So finding the right metrics per platform and really getting that personal feedback, I think, has been the most helpful for us.
Okay. Katie and Dave, this next question I think is for both of you guys. Katie, I'll ask it to you first, and then Dave, I'll let you kind of follow up. But are you seeing customer expectations and customer behavior changing as you go through this shift? And if so, I mean, what are you finding most significant about, what customers want now, or what your residents and citizens want now?
Yeah, just like I mentioned earlier, the need for parks has just increased more than we can really, put into numbers, because we don't necessarily have someone, at every park entrance clicking to see how many people come by in a day. But it's really amazing to watch the activity online, whether it's from a Google review or a Yelp review or just emails asking us about, when are playgrounds going to be safe to reopen, and when are we going to see more activities like a fitness class, in parks. And so watching our community really find that need and that love for their local parks has been fantastic, and definitely a great opportunity for us to put more of our time outside and work on that recreation, being outdoors and being accessible for everyone. So we've definitely seen a change in our community really having an admiration and respect for parks and being invested and really caring about their local parks as well, since they're spending more time there.
That's really great. David, you have probably a broader national perspective on this. Are you seeing, customer and stakeholder expectations or behaviors change? And if so, what do those changes start to look like?
Yeah, I think what's happening is that as the different technologies are being deployed to make it easier to access information, people want more and more, right? So,
Yeah.
in the case of parks, right? I have a park here local to me that has 4 tennis courts that we paid for a millage a little while ago to improve across the city. And I'd love for them to put a camera up there so I could look and see, okay, are there any courts open, right? Before I drive out there. So I do see, that as more and more people are taking advantage of the efforts of different districts and government entities to continue to deliver service, and now many times that's at a higher level, because in the past there can be a lot of applications and automation approaches that when you sit down and really look at it, it's like, well, a lot of our constituents, they just want to pick up a phone and call and talk to somebody. Well, right now that's you can, but it can be tough to get to them. So I'm seeing lots of ideas and lots of things being looked into and experimented with. Again, still video is a big thing because there's so much you can do with the intelligence side of it. But having access to, quick information about opening, different things that are available. So I do see it growing. I mean, we as an organization as well, as we support, governments in this pandemic, we've been able to leverage and get things done much quicker than we would normally be able to do, because we're putting governments at a higher level of accessibility. So we have expectations to deal with as well, right? So it's, if somebody gets a taste of it, they'll want more.
Yeah. So last question, again, for both of you guys. Katie, you've talked a little bit about the impact that some of these new digital channels have had around community engagement, and which is really interesting. How do you carry forward? You've made some changes. You've worked in new ways. What does that mean for the future? What are you going to hang on to the new ways of doing things, and how does it shape the way you guys think about what you do?
That's a fantastic question. I think we are all, working to be flexible and continue evolving our methods as new information comes to us, right? And so we are definitely planning, I think, to continue, researching and serving our community and finding out if how we're serving them now is, a great fit for them, because every community is different. And so for us, we will take this opportunity as we're experimenting with new programming and new methods and find out if this is something that, our community would like to keep. And, is this a form of communication, or is this form of community outreach more effective than how we were doing it before? And if that's the case, I do believe, our district is, they care so much and want to make sure that we are doing the right thing for our community. And so we would continue with these new methods. And if we need to transition back to, maybe a mix where we have some of the old ways and some of the new ways, then we'll do that as well. But really making sure that we're getting that feedback and we're taking that feedback, and our leadership is making the right decision for the people we serve.
Dave, I'll give you the last word on this. Any thoughts on, or even words of advice on what's important to kind of pull out of this current experience and maybe how do you think about the future given what we know now?
Yeah, I would just say that a lot of what Katie's doing in other districts, deploying, I used to call it platform as a service, but systems and tools that you can do, you can manage workflows, you can build, quick forms, you can deploy newsletters that maybe work like in a constant contact, that you can standardize and authorize data that'll be available within your district, so that whatever the next thing that comes, right, you may not have the 100% reaction to it, but you have some tools and processes in place that allow you to at least, get to 80% right away, and then, you backfill as you continue to deploy. I think it's a little unique in the districts and the state and local governments that this type of interaction, just wasn't there before, right? It's a democratization of the people out there. Many things get passed and it's very low visibility, and it's not necessarily always apathetic. It's just it's hard. Well, now as we move through this and we start to provide more information, and giving people the ability to filter that information to their interest, right, is important. So I just think a lot of the lessons learned as it's almost a rapid deployment method, right? It's almost like deploying in beta, right, where you just have to get out there, pick the top 80% and deliver something. Hopefully the systems can be transformed as we go forward, to continue to give our districts that type of flexibility.
Yeah. Dave, thanks for your insight. Katie, great to hear what you guys are doing. I really appreciate you guys talking to us for a little while. Dustin, I will hand it back to you.
All right, thanks, Steve. A great panel. A few things that kind of stood out in the chat that kind of came from that. I know Natalia Romo is doing regular surveys at her district through curbside pickup, as well as on their website. So you want to check that out in the chat. And then Corey Johnson posted a great link to the drive-through testing site and a partnership that's happening at the Hillsborough Stadium in regards to COVID-19 testing. So check out the links that have been posted there. Keep sharing those great insights from the group. And now we want to segue into our next panel, which is around adapting operations for a new reality. So we know that operations were really, drastically impacted and disrupted by COVID-19 and kind of where we're at today with that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how two districts and kind of what's going on nationally, how they responded to this and how they adapted their operations to this new reality and how they're trying to keep up with whatever comes next. So we've got Brian Sestakas, the CIO for LA County Metro. And we've got Gretchen Casarati, the Library Director for the Meridian Library District. And then Dave Leach is back from AT&T as well. So thanks so much for joining us. David, we'll start with you just to kind of get a national perspective to set the stage with how you're seeing special districts adapt their operations and services to this new reality.
Yeah, I'm almost sounding like a broken record, right? It's how do I deploy the technology? What I'm seeing is revisiting investments that they've had in the past and deploying capabilities to get the information that they may or not been able to, previously before this happened. And then a real focus on improvement and like process improvement and really quality control types of approaches to, what is the most efficient way to either capture this information or deliver what's happening in our areas. And it's just, it's been refreshing to see the creative, efforts that everybody's been doing to look at how technology can help. And it's really great that that's happening because obviously I think the first poll was about budgets, right? Everybody's going to be continuing to be doing more with less, and the more that technology can be leveraged, the better off we'll be.
Absolutely. And as you were answering that, we also launched our next poll to kind of gather from the community what their greatest operational challenges were. And it looks like workforce policy procedures, so incorporating social distancing, and then that lack of funding and budget that continues to pop up seem to be some of the top things. So we're sharing that with the group now so that way you can see that. So Brian, I want to bring you into the conversation now. You have a very large organization and transit was really hit probably the hardest, right? When you think about it from a funding standpoint and your whole business model is built around getting people to come and ride and leverage the transit systems. How did COVID-19 impact your operations and your employees? Did you have to shift anything in order to kind of adjust to that remote side of how you deliver things?
Well, of course, when you talk about a system that relies on usage and customers, and when you have interactions of a safer at home where people are now mandated in a way to not to move from A to Z and Z to A. It's definitely a challenge. But you know, we have other people that are still providing emergency services. You have first responders. You have everybody else that need to provide required services. So we just can't shut down. So we did have a shift from an operational standpoint on running a much reduced schedule, but we also didn't want to have any type of potential workforce reductions, you know, so it is a change. And how do we modify that? And how do we take into consideration a large agency such as ours to maintain the inflow of revenue, especially when we're so tax-based heavy. A lot of Metro's funding isn't necessarily from fare box collection. It's a lot of our other measures on tax and tolls and other areas. And that's something that is going to have a larger impact going on from today into tomorrow. But from a technical standpoint, we've been implementing over the past few years the ability to adapt to disasters, whether they're environmental, whether they're physical, and so forth. So from a technology standpoint, the shift of our workforce to a mobile environment wasn't that much of a stretch for us. But you know, maybe other conversations are around how did that workforce adapt to that change? You know, we met the call from a technology perspective, but now the usage, the engagement, the ability to work in a new environment, all of those areas were something that we started to see pop up, and we shifted more towards training and communications and other areas to try to really provide a more consistent workforce that is no longer on premise. So that's always been a challenge and will continue to be, as this will probably be part of our permanent culture going forward.
Yeah, there's some consensus on the chat around kind of the new reality versus the new normal. So definitely agree there. So kind of a quick follow-up. I know, you know, we all saw the CARES Act get passed, but not every district was eligible for funding. But I believe LA Metro was able to receive some. Can you talk a little bit about how that was put to use?
Yeah, in fact, we received a lot. I mean, we're probably approaching over $1 billion right now from the CARES Act. I remember we got around 861 million, and we've pretty much have drawn down almost 90% of that. A lot of that is all around operations, wages, infrastructure that we've applied for. And so we've done a very good job in those applications. And really sometimes the challenge is the usage, you know, showing and drawing down that funding that was allocated towards you. We've also tapped a lot of FEMA. FEMA had a few options as well, and we're looking at another 150 million to 200. And that's where we shifted a lot of our quick expanses for licensing and other technology needs that had to really happen that weren't forecasted in our original budget. So most of it has been all operational. We did receive a sizable amount, and unfortunately, at an agency this big, that's just still not enough in the long term to try to keep a system going forward. But it's been very effective to prevent mass layoffs and so forth here at Metro.
Absolutely. So Gretchen, I want to bring you into the conversation now. And I know, you know, your district closed its doors when the first COVID case was really confirmed. So you took a very proactive approach there. And then you did some really amazing things to kind of shift your services. Can you tell us about what and how you shifted your services to virtual?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We really had to focus first on staff safety. Our short-term needs when we closed were really focusing on providing that security, both in terms of the safety in the physical space, but also with financial hardships. We knew we were going to need our staff, and we just needed to take a moment to catch our breath to put a strategy behind what we were going to do. So in order to shift all of these heavily used services, we had 1.6 million circs of our library collections, 1,000 people a day through the door in one of our locations, really high volume, high transaction. How could we translate that to a virtual environment? Step one was to redeploy funds, to reallocate funds toward our digital collections. At this point, a snapshot is we've seen about a 60% increase in the loans and borrows of ebooks, audio, streaming content through the library's digital collections. We have really kind of 5 pillars of services that we provide in a physical space. And so we worked through strategically each one with our management team and getting staff input to figure out how to translate those to a virtual environment. Programs, you think of public libraries, most people think of story times. It's sort of our bread and butter. But there was also really a glut of content being produced on the web at that time. And so we really wanted to be thoughtful about the time that staff would have to take to put into producing programs, managing through copyright laws, which are from a very analog and antiquated time, how to translate that to a virtual space, and coming up with products that would provide meaning and value to the community. And as such, we took our time to do that with building a strategy. Now we're seeing 12,000 some views of our programs in many different platforms, utilizing different platforms for both recorded and live programs. For traditional reference and readers advisory services in a library, we had always wanted to move to providing virtual chat, and this was sort of like a kick in the pants to make us do that. So we researched and used a platform called LiveChat to put a plugin in our website, and we see 800 to 1,000 inquiries from our public through a mobile friendly version, as well as a desktop client for chat directly through our website. So that's been very popular, as well as making reading recommendations and helping people with questions they might have about community resources, etc. But a public library also provides internet access. And I think that was probably our hardest pillar of service to translate to a virtual environment. I saw somebody put in the chat, they were loaning hotspots, pretty common in libraries, but also the volume then was something that was really difficult for us to manage. We turned up our bandwidth so that we could push strong, high quality Wi-Fi out into parking lots. We've tried to figure out how to put self-serve computers into our lobby that people could come and use without staff having to interact with them, make that contactless, and really tried to find ways to creatively provide computer and internet service to people during this time period, especially for job applications and filing for unemployment. And then we also have special strategic or community-based projects. So during the shutdown, it was sort of like a sleeping beauty spell and everything just kind of went to sleep. But we really had a lot of tools that were just sitting idle, and we tried to think about what are the community needs right now and how can we use library tools to fill those needs. We have a lot of 3D printers, and we took a lot of those 3D printers and collaborated with other libraries as well as Boise State University to 3D print face shields for healthcare workers in the community. And we tried to look at ways that we could use some of those. We also had a fleet of vehicles that we used for outreach. And so we translated those Sleeping Beauty vehicles into a home delivery service that has been very popular over the last few months. So instead of waiting for people to come to us, we can contactless bring the materials to their doorstep and leave it for them to borrow at their convenience. And that's been very successful. So
wow,
virtual,
you've been busy.
Yeah, we have been.
So kind of a quick follow-up question that actually came from the audience was just around, the accessibility side of things, right? Because there's a shift to virtual. So I'm just curious, per that question, how you balance, the need to also maintain accessibility for those that may not have the means of accessing those services.
Well, we have a really robust outreach program. So in our library, we maintained direct connections to prioritizing at-risk, high-risk, high-need, underserved populations, whether that's the Boys and Girls Club in a low-income neighborhood, senior centers that are in lockdown, finding ways to work with the providers there. But I can put a link in the chat box as well that might be useful. For virtual programs, there's an association, division of the American Library Association that has virtual toolkits for accessibility. And so we used a lot of the resources through there to kind of self-audit for our programs. Are we using captions? Are we using gender inclusive language? And that toolkit was really helpful. So when I have a moment, I'll pull that link up and put that in the chat for folks.
Awesome, thanks Gretchen. Well, David, I want to bring you back in. So I know that technology plays a really key role in a lot of these transitions. So operationally, what are some of those key technologies that enable special districts to shift their operations to that virtual environment? Any challenges that they need to be aware of and mitigate in the process?
Yeah, it's interesting. So VPN technology, of course, right? How do you virtually and privately access your back office systems? As well as cloud-based access and migration of applications to a trusted GovCloud provider, and then how do you authenticate the people that are getting to it and manage and monitor them. Another thing is the mobile apps that I think I mentioned earlier. There's been a number of things out there that being able to move the types of applications we can now to a small device, right, and get out and do site visits. And if you tie it together with some mobile device management, you can pull satellite, longitude and latitude. You can confirm and validate a person was where they said they were, time, and so on and so forth. So those are just some of the technologies, and then like I said, the video analytics that I think is probably going to be one of the big things that continue on, as we go forward in this new reality. Or whatever version we end up with, I think that'll continue on. One of the challenges, which was interesting, and some people had this with Zoom when they started using it, is your kind of your ad hoc support structure, right? The guy or the person that might be 2 cubes over that can always help people through something that's happening, right? As you're deploying this technology, it's all training by fire, right? So many of the tools now that get deployed, I guess I'd say, are very robust in their capabilities. So that was a big challenge for some of these technologies that get moved out. How does the user use it? Where do they go for support? How do they get the productivity up quick on something new like that? So ongoing just training and helping people adopt these technologies was a challenge that really everybody leveraged, again, the collaboration tools that are out there, the Teams or the SharePoints or whatever it is, to continue to support each other as they get used to the technology and make it useful.
Great. So Brian, I know that communication has played a really critical role in how you've adapted your operations. You have a big workforce, they're operating, in a variety of different mediums. So what role did communication play in kind of adapting your operations for this new reality?
Well, communications is critical regardless of the situation you're in. For us, it's twofold. You have a lot of internal communications that we'll lead with this on our staff and how we're handling that, as well as external communications to the people that want to use the system and its safety and so forth during a situation as of today. But internally, it's imperative to have messaging that is consistent, that is concurrent, and from pretty much one source. A lot of times there's a lot of questions that are constantly asked, and any deviation from a consistent message, whether it's dealing with safety and COVID, or how are we handling people's sanity and the ability to work remotely. We've kept that coming from 2 different channels, but the consistency was always pushed back to those engagements. And they consist of messaging on how we're adapting to a workforce that is remote. If people come into the office, what are policies? What's the current COVID situation on hot areas and outbreaks of virus where people are from a transit perspective? What's been our response in cleaning regimes? As well as how we're engaging our staff to stay a part of the culture, the community. I mean, one of the biggest challenges we have to learn in this time is really trying to lead with empathy on this. We have to, you don't have that physical interaction anymore. It's tiring looking at, a monitor for 8-10 hours a day, and not, I think, Daniel talked about earlier about getting up and having some sort of physical engagement. And when you're at home or when you're remote, you lose that culture perspective of being part of an agency. And so in our communications, not just what we're doing and how we're dealing with it, but how our staff is dealing themselves and keeping them engaged with their own teams and partners. I've been hearing there's been more engagement in meetings and everything now remotely than they've ever had while they were at the headquarters. So we want to do that consistent message. Our PIO and communications officer took the lead on that. We had multiple channels, both from text and links on how to stay active and supportive of individuals remotely. We've also done a lot of videos and a lot of learning programs. You know, we've reached out to LinkedIn and did a lot of LinkedIn learning on how to manage more of a remote staff. Again, this change was never really a technical issue for us, but an adaptation of our workforce in how to manage now a remote workforce. So that's where a lot of our push has been, and keeping them part of Metro's culture in this time away from the office.
Yeah, I like the love the LinkedIn learning aspect of, you know, getting your employees to really focus on some of those new trades that they need. And speaking of employees, Gretchen, I want to get your perspective on this. You know, it's one thing to kind of say you're going to move things virtual. It's another to get employees to actually embrace it and want to do that. So how did you get your employees to adapt, and how did they respond to those changes?
Yeah, it was a period of a lot of change and uncertainty and confusion. And so it certainly was a challenge, and to commend our managers and our supervisors on staff, the lion's share of that really fell to them. So I'm very proud of the fact that they were so committed to our organizational culture and our mission and our service philosophy, because they really were so instrumental in deploying these new programs and services. And I would echo a lot of what Brian said. Those were similar tactics that we used, was regular communication, clear communication, communication before an initiative was launched so that people knew what was going on, and looking for ways to be consistent and be an anchor for them throughout that period of change was something we really strove for. We have about 85 employees across 3 different locations, and people's position duties vary really widely. So for our administrative team, managers, we had already been working remotely. People had been very flexible. We had set ourselves up. So the transition was very easy for administration. But for our line staff, who are working, 85% roughly of our staff work in direct public facing roles, that required a little bit more thought and time and strategy to really find meaningful work for them to do that suited their positions and their pay scales. So we really wanted to strive for equity in a division of work and labor, in whether it was virtual or in person, as we prepared to reopen our buildings as Idaho reopened. So thankfully we had a lot of really tech savvy staff already, and very hungry, ambitious, professionally dedicated people on our team. So we kind of had to slow staff down a little bit to say, let's really think this through. What does this look like? Is it sustainable? If we start this now, how can we sustain this long term? Is it a short term or a long term decision we're going to make? What needs to go into it? Do we have the equipment? Do you have everything you need? Do you have stable Wi-Fi? So we have really terrific IT manager and tech support that really helped hold the staff's hand as we moved through that, as we broadened who was working remotely and what those services were. But we had already prepared ourselves to also move paperless as a goal for us to be sustainable, a commitment to sustainability. We had already moved to QuickBooks Online. We had moved to Bill.com. So administratively, that move was really easy, which allowed us the energy to put into supporting the staff who were doing new work, using new tools in a remote environment. And finally, I would just add that the longer this goes on, now, today, we're in a place where we're really needing to focus on healthcare, mental health, the stress, the isolation, these issues that we know our staff are experiencing. I know there was talk in the chat earlier about public surveys. We've been regularly surveying our staff and giving them an opportunity to connect with HR or supervisors privately and confidentially if they need help, if they're having a financial hardship, if they're having childcare issues that we can help them work through with the tools that are available. And so we're really trying to find ways to make sure that we're providing better support with self-care at this point in the process, because it's just going on for so long and there's really not an end in sight.
It's a new reality. Well, that's great feedback. So Brian and David, I want to give you a chance to also just tell us a little bit about maybe what's on your radar before we transition to the next panel. What are you tracking on? What do you see that's going to be important for these leaders to take advantage of? Brian, let's start with you.
You know, almost what echoing on what Gretchen just said. When you talk about an onboarding or an approach, it's a mental change for everybody, and so what we thought we might be encountering right now is not something we are. It looks like we are encountering this scenario even further, and that consequence has other consequences. childcare now. Schools are not in service. So now we might have people that work at Metro that have their single parent provider that now have their kids at home. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at to do from a way to how do we support them? How are we trying to get that in, and what policies we need to play in that? From a technical standpoint, we're leveraging more cybersecurity again. That's critical for us because we have that remote workforce that's heavily engaged externally. We're looking at more of sensor data that we're trying to do as people come on board. We look at our transit systems, and when people start to engage more, we can tell when certain cars are full or not full, and how to direct them more conveniently to other vacated rail cars that are open. And data. Data for us, I think, has always been critical from day one. Leveraging data, we were able to see where outbreaks were, what our consistency were, not just even within the county, but we've applied that because Metro is so large of an agency into our divisions. When staff members may have come in contact with another person and the policy for them to go out. I mean, there were times that even one of my divisions in IT that have 16 people, 14 of them had to be out because of a COVID requirement that one of them came in contact with someone. So they were out for 14 days as a precaution. So tracking that information and knowing how to support an agency, data, cybersecurity, sensors, that's all something I see us leveraging going forward, at least in the transit world, on how to provide that service of making it more customer friendly and definitely providing the information our leaders need to make proper decisions.
That's great. David, final word is with you.
So I think Gretchen nailed it. It's the human element now, right? So we've all reacted. We're all living day to day. We're making sure we get our stuff done. But for many people, it's a trudge, right? It's, you don't get to stop and grab coffee on the way in, talk to your coworker, bounce a night. So I guess, going forward, how can we be, as results driven as possible, right? How can we empower employees to use the tools that they have to deliver what they have to deliver? Because, that is going to be the second half of this, right? Is how people maintain, mental health and an attitude, we got to get through. We see it where people won't wear masks, right? It's just, there's a lot of added stressors to it. So I don't know if that's game theory. I don't know if that's introducing, contests and things that lighten up some of the engagement within an organization. But as we become more and more efficient using the tools that are out there, I think the next step is how do we socialize this remote workforce so everybody can, really maintain their sanity and be fired up when it's over, or at least as over it's going to be for a while.
The new reality. Well, thanks, Brian, Gretchen, and David for sharing your insights. A lot of great takeaways there for our audience. And now we want to shift gears into our next panel on the future of leadership. So we've got Daryl Johnson, the CEO of Orange County Transportation Authority, Kristen Misteller, the Mason County Public Utility District Number 1, and former Chief Bruce Moeller. He's the former Chief of Staff and Assistant County Administrator for Pinellas County, Florida. And while they're hopping on, I'm gonna hit you all with a poll question on leadership challenges. So this was, this panel emerged, as I mentioned at the beginning, from our National Advisory Board that helped shape this program. And one of the top things that this board really identified was where leadership and management need to evolve going forward. So we know that this isn't like, just having a flexible workday. This is a new reality, and it requires a totally different set of skills and a totally different set of leadership requirements just to navigate. And so we'll see what your top leadership challenges are today. We got a good consensus there, and let's see. All right, looks like top one, managing remote employees. We're going to talk about that. Managing and adapting culture, definitely something that's on our radar as well. And with that, let's transition into our next panel. So, Daryl, thanks so much for joining us. First question is for you. So, a major aspect of leadership is really about being prepared. We've heard some of the other panelists in the other panels talking about their paperless initiatives and how they kind of laid the foundation for it. I'd love to hear, how you architected a foundation in your district to rapidly respond to COVID.
Hey, thanks, Dustin. I appreciate the invitation. Noticed on the calendar it's August 25th, but I like to call it the 177th day of March because it feels like that's what we're in here. But one of our early responses, we activated our emergency operations plan at the end of February before the governor's stay-at-home order. And that was a big deal for us because we had spent a significant amount of time over the last 5 to 6 years really sort of strengthening our continuity of operations plan, our crisis communications plan. And we really thought at some point we'd have to use it for a flood, a fire, or an earthquake. We didn't think we would be using it for a public health crisis. But that effort that we did around drills and around thinking about how we couldn't access our headquarters building to run our systems, run our transit system, build our projects, really prepared us to move to a remote workforce. So in fact, a full week before the stay-at-home order, we just sent all of our professional staff, about 500 people, remote work. We issued tablets to about 100 people that didn't have them. And that really sort of allowed us to get a leg up, if you will, on that. And a big part of that success was technology, of course, but a bigger part of that was those sort of drills and exercises in previous years about forcing people to do their jobs, to do their work, to do their interaction from a remote location. So I think that's a big part of that foundation. We had made a transition beginning in 2014 with our telephone system to voice over IP. We moved a lot of our architecture into the cloud in recent years, but we really weren't utilizing it to its full extent. It was all about having it if we needed it, using it as offsite backup, having the ability for people to do that. And we really just weren't using it. In late 2018, sort of dealing with what I would say the millennial generation, we instigated or instituted a remote work pilot program. So we asked 30 professional staff to volunteer to test remote working over the course of 2019 to learn from it. How would it work? How would people interact? How would the technology work? So we were in the process of testing that and sort of rolling that more broadly as more of an attraction and retention tool than anything. And that really set the groundwork for us. We had 30 employees doing that over the course of the week. And I think or the course of the year. So I think if you take this idea of planning for earthquake, fire, and flood, moving technology in a good direction, and then dealing with this remote working from an attraction and retention standpoint, those really all came together in late February, gave us the opportunity and the confidence more than anything to push that work into a different space and really try to keep things rolling without missing a beat.
Yeah, definitely a foundation for rapid adaptation. So Kristen, I want to bring you into the conversation now. And, you were one of the first agencies in your county to really respond to COVID-19 publicly. You were kind of waiting to see what everyone was doing, but someone had to lead the charge, and you did. Tell us about your steps here.
Sure. So, yeah, Mason County is a pretty rural community in Washington State, and we kept watching the number of cases kind of go on an upward trend because Washington State had the first known reported case in the United States. And even though it wasn't in Mason County yet, we knew it was coming. And so as I'm looking around at the county and the city and the other public agencies, I kept waiting for somebody to take the leap and start the initiative to close down, and nobody was doing it. And so I think, a lot of it was trying to decide if they needed to have policies in place first of how to do it, and, worried about what the public feedback would be. And my agency is very small. There's only 25 of us here. And so that the size of our agency allowed us to be a little more nimble, I think, than others. And I have a commission that's very supportive and realizing that safety is a core value of our organization, which means we don't reprioritize it over anything, and that comes first. So we, prior to Governor Inslee's executive orders, we shut down. We closed our offices. We communicated with the public. We're still here. We're just not in the building where you can come in and see us. Our critical electric and water workforce is still working. They're still keeping your power on and your water flowing. A lot of it had to do with communications. It was letting the sister agencies in the county know what we were doing, and then they started to follow suit within the next few days. And then really just communicating to the public that we're taking leadership here. We're continuing the services that you've had the whole time. We're just delivering them a little bit differently. And I think having that special meeting, having the commissioners make that decision immediately, we were able to then communicate it out to our employees. Usually my leadership style is to kind of collaborate and bring people on board with an idea before we move forward. And with this type of pandemic, you just don't have the time for that. And so I think our employees appreciated that we made some swift decisions, things that are standard now in all of our workplaces, but nobody had ever thought about working from home before in a public utility district. And people weren't doing shifts, and these were all brand new things. And we told them, we're probably going to change this a couple times before we get a routine that works well for us. And that's okay. It's more important that we act rather than sit on our hands. And I think everybody appreciated that. And the communications that we put out to the public and to our employees, we actually shared those with our state PUD association, and they were able to take those materials and share them with other utilities in our state. So it was nice to be able to collaborate with each other and share that information. I think it helped all of us be a lot more effective and decisive.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, the citizens that you serve are really looking for action. So, it's great and inspiring to see that you stepped up and really created a model for others around you. So, Bruce, I want to bring you in. I know that, you have managed a variety of different types of, crisis over the years. This is one that doesn't follow the normal cycle. And I know you've got some great perspectives, not just about what leaders need to do today, but what they should not do today. What can we learn from some of those common leadership failures?
Yeah. So thanks, Dustin. There's some great research on what failures are of leadership during this. And I think we can all agree that current circumstances justify in using that term. Let me talk about the 5 items, and there's 5 of those that managers really need to know about. The first one that we refer to as failed communication. I'm not just talking about chatting with people, but really you understand in this environment, the information is changing dramatically and it's changing frequently. And so where are you getting your information from? The typical status of most people in a crisis is to kind of hunker down, to limit their communication, to try to avoid engaging too many people. They'll have to answer questions. And that's a critical failure, because what you need to do is you need to understand what's going on. You've got to expand your circle you're getting information from. So you have to understand what's happening and what's anticipated to come next. So you're going to have to communicate not just internally, but also perhaps with people you haven't communicated with before, public health officials, etc. The second failure it has to do with planning, that there's a failure to plan. Again, we want to put a rosy picture on. That's human nature. Everybody wants to do that. But in doing, making it overly optimistic, we're failing to anticipate what could go wrong and how best to respond to it. And of course, we can see certainly here, this example, as in all other examples that we look at historically over time, is resource constraints. Do we have enough what we need to serve our primary mission? What's gonna come stack up on that we really need to get our hands on quickly? And just somebody and saying, yes, yes, we got it. It is amazing in a crisis how many times the people you think can deliver will actually be able to deliver. The fourth, public relations, communications to our public. Culture and politics pour a vacuum. If you don't sit there and share information with people out in the public, if you don't share press and the media, you're going to be heading for a problem. So you need to communicate effectively and often with those who need to serve, as well as your elected body, senior management, etc. And finally, all 4 of those really encompass leadership overall. It has to do with a recognition that we're in a pandemic, in a crisis. And of course, we call them disaster reasons. It's easy to dig yourself into a hole and to avoid drawing attention. Resist that instinct. You've got to sit there, communicate, discuss it within the organization, anticipate what's going to be happening, make the plans for those resources and communicate with the public.
Great advice. So Daryl and Kristen, I want to get your perspective on just kind of how this has changed the way that you manage. So Daryl, we'll start with you. 2020 has been a year of uncertainty, a year of a lot of radical change. How do you lead your organization through this? Are there things that stand out from a leadership standpoint that you can share with our audience?
Justin, I think there are so many things that have changed, but to try to hone in on some of the key points is, transparency in public agencies may be a bit of an overused term. It's obviously important, but this idea of how to communicate both internally and externally in a very transparent manner has become something I'm very, very much focused on. And, you can turn on any news channel and whatever you heard yesterday is going to change today and change tomorrow. So I think this idea that we like to tell our employees as leaders, we know what's going to happen. The reality is we don't know what's going to happen. So what I've tried to do is take the opportunity through my communication is to be very transparent, saying, I don't exactly have all the answers. I don't know what we're going to do, but here's the way I'm approaching the decision making. And we might be changing that. And I'm going to do my absolute best to let you know in advance if we're changing. And I think one of the results of that is this idea of that we're putting more of a human touch on it. We put some empathy around understanding the challenges our employees have at home around all the things you've heard about today: childcare, healthcare, multi-generational families, technology challenges, schooling, all of those things. And that has really helped from my perspective. And it's come back multiple times in a very positive manner. One example of that, we, as like you all do, we have a return to workplace plan. And we keep pushing the start date of that, right? We thought it was going to be July 1st, and we thought it was going to be August 1st. Well, now we're looking at September 21st. And I keep telling the employees, I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but I'm going to tell you as soon as I know, and I'm going to try to give you as much notice as possible. And we're going to work with you each and every step of the way. And for me, it's been important that I give that message versus have somebody else on the team give that message, because I want them to hear it from me, because I think there's meaning in that. So that's the area I've been focusing on, Dustin.
That's great. Kristen, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, those are great points, Daryl. I would concur with all of those. And then for us, it was really, these uncharted waters call for a higher risk tolerance, and it's better to leap and not get it right the first time than to sit on your hands and not do anything. And that was something that was tough for me. I was scared that we were going to look ridiculous or dramatic or overreacting by closing everything down and sending everybody home. But I really didn't care. I was more scared that my employees were going to get sick and we weren't going to be in control of how we shut down and how we continue to serve our public. So, I didn't want to get caught flat-footed, but I also wanted to make sure that, as Daryl said, that the employees heard it from me, that we were talking every week about the things that we were putting into place, and that we had that feedback loop where if things were working well or not working well, the employees felt comfortable to come and say, I really think we should try this instead. And that happened, and we changed part of our operations because of that. But, my main thing that's going to change how we move forward is our emergency response plan and business continuity. We had one for natural disasters. We've done the tabletop drills, but we really didn't have anything centered around a pandemic or anything to this level. And I really think that, drilling it down to a people level, these are people, they're real people, they're real customers that depend on us for basic life amenities. They're real employees that have families and their own stressors at home. The stakes are high. And so they're all looking to someone to step up into that leadership role and provide that sense of calm and that sense of at least someone is in charge and trying to handle this for us, even if we stumble a little bit to get there. So I think, you're hearing throughout all of these panels, communication is a very big theme and a big thread, and it's another one of our core values at Mason PUD #1. So I think if you communicate really well, you can be forgiven for the missteps in the uncharted territory.
Absolutely. And actually a quick follow-up question from you, Kristen, from the audience is around how you deal with the difference between field versus office staff. So, if you have office staff that have the ability to work from home and field staff that still have to show up because, they're deemed quote unquote essential or eligible employees, how do you deal with the resentment or morale issues there? Is that something that you've had to deal with in your PUD?
I thought we would. Surprisingly, our employees have just been amazing, and we're a union shop, so there's other things that you kind of have to navigate through, trickly. But our employees have been fantastic, and we at first tried a 1 week on, 1 week off to isolate the shifts so they don't contaminate everybody if somebody comes in sick, because we do provide critical water and power services, but I think they all were just so happy that we were continuing to keep everybody on the payroll and continuing to work. We weren't having to talk about furloughs. Everybody their paychecks were whole, and they saw the effort that we were putting into things. And so I haven't had much pushback or grumbling about so-and-so gets to work from their house, and so-and-so has to still report. We try to rotate it so it's even. And again, we talk back and forth a lot. Almost every day we have crew meetings where management team's out there saying, how are things going? And I think that has kind of squashed any squabbling that might have crept up.
Yeah, it sounds like communication really plays such a critical role, and not just response, but kind of how you deal with the cultural dynamics. So Daryl, I want to get your perspective. One of the other big questions that we often get asked is around how do you prioritize what to do, right? There's so many different options that are out there. There's so many complexities. You've got public health, all these other things. How do you prioritize what your district is focused on?
So it's a great question, Dustin. Just a little bit about our district. We have 1,500 employees, and we run the public transit system, but we also run toll lanes, express lanes, and we build freeway projects. So we have this very strange dynamic of about 500 professional staff and about 900 frontline transit workers. So we have tried to make all of our decisions around that with that balance in mind, that we have a role, that there are people that have no choice to move around our county, around our district in Southern California, unless the bus system is there. So we felt that we needed to have that out there, but we needed to do it in a way that protected the health and safety of our drivers and our operators. So, foregoing fares, moving to rear door boarding, putting up plexiglass shields, installing hand sanitizers on 550 buses over a 3-day weekend. We did a lot of those types of things all up front and trying to follow those guidelines from public health. At the same time, trying to make sure we had this professional staff that could work remotely, that had the tools they needed, so you could run payroll remotely to pay the frontline workers that were out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. At the same time, dealing with the challenges of not knowing how the virus was transmitted. Should you have a mask for your bus driver or not? That was a big debate early on, as you know. And then finally, just trying to balance in the budgetary process what was most important. And my take on that was, I didn't want to present our board of directors with difficult choices. I wanted to make the difficult choices and present them with something that they could make in good conscience. We don't have a union shop for our professional staff, so not offering up bonuses and raises like we would in a normal year, just taking those out. Don't even ask the question. Dealing with those types of things. Dealing with, putting off bus purchases, knowing we can do that at a later date. And at the same time, making sure that we're not doing any of these initiatives that just don't make sense. They might have made sense 9 months ago, but they don't make sense today. So that prioritization of public health, employee health is a big balance, and overlaid with this idea of being a public transit provider, where we have to put people out working each and every day in a space that we don't know is safe or not. We obviously know a lot more today than we did in March or April. So that's how I balanced it, Dustin, is trying to figure out that balance between employee safety, public safety, and at the same time, making sure we're making good decisions with the taxpayer dollars that we're entrusted with.
Yeah, those are great tactics. So Bruce, I'm interested in your thoughts on, what are some of the most important things that you think special district leaders listening in today should really be focused on right now?
Yeah. So let me change the content a bit before I talked about kind of the failures that often happen in crisis. I think probably one of the important things, and Darryl kind of alluded to this, or at least he said that we know necessarily what's going to happen. We don't have perfect information, but yet I made the claim that you need to have planning at the same time. So you've got this juxtaposition between not having information but need to plan. It really is assembling kind of a number of scenarios they have to accomplish, and then to be aware of what's going to happen next. There's something referred to as situational awareness. And what that really is there's a lot of information out there, tremendous amount of data that we're all inundated. You've got to sit and try to select and pick those things that are the most significant for you, for your operation, for what you do. When you have that information, then you have a better understanding of what's happening now, which second phase of this situational awareness. Honestly, the third is the most difficult. What's happened next? Is it going to go completely off the rails? Is it going to be, are you going to end up with 50% workforce needing isolated? Or are you going to get lucky to break and perhaps just have everybody there, but now you're not going to have resources that you need, the material that you need. So then contingency planning is important. As I indicated before, you have to spread out a little bit from where you normally get your information. Because this is so unusual, you have to get information from your public health people, from your public safety personnel, from your emergency managers, from your state officials. Even though you're a special district, your professional associations are a great resource. Try to anticipate what's coming next. Stick your up, understand what's coming next, and try to get prepared for that, both in the plan and the resources.
So we have a question from the audience here from Patrick Smith. Employee well-being has been themed throughout the summit so far. And have any of you done anything by any way of stipends or incentives or other help to employees beyond leaves related to the Families First Act or providing mobile devices? Are you doing anything for kind of that employee well-being side of things? So that'll be a toss up to the group if Kristen, Daryl, or Bruce, if you're aware of anything as well.
This is Daryl. I'm happy to jump in. We've done what we call Thirst for Knowledge sessions, TFKs. They're virtual sessions where we have a wellness coordinator on staff, and we've had 3 focus sessions just on mental wellness, mental health. And we have a mental health benefit through our benefit program. We also negotiated for about a 90 to 120 day period, no copay on that. So there was no disincentive, if you will, for somebody to go out there and use that. And then we also tried to communicate it sort of from senior management on down that it's okay to talk about mental health. It's okay to take a vacation. It's okay to say these things are tough. We have a benefit. It doesn't cost you anything, and we would like you to use it. So we've been sort of pushing that component as much as we can. And at the same time, I think it was mentioned earlier, forcing people to take vacations in a soft way, not demanding it, not requiring it, but really encouraging people. I think Randy Iwasaki said it earlier, just you got to take some time off. You have to take some step time away from the desk. So that's what we've done, Dustin.
That's great. So Kristen, what is on your radar right now for the future, and how are you preparing to lead your district through what comes next?
I think one of the biggest issues that caught us a little bit flat-footed this time has been supply chain issues. Like everyone else, we had a hard time getting just basic stuff for like toilet paper and tissues and hand sanitizer, which made it a challenge to keep our office open. I had to bring supplies from home. But what we came out of it is we were able to find these partnerships with like Costco and our local grocery stores, and we negotiated these deals where they would keep things off to the side for us so we could stay supplied and operating. We have water systems that we have to test the water quality, so we needed bleach and rubbing alcohol, and these are things that we're having a hard time getting. So I think looking at our supply chain and kind of instead of a day's cash on hand, you have a day's supply on hand, like how far can we operate and what's a comfortable stockpile for us to start slowly accumulating if we get another wave or another pandemic. And then also getting our employees all the ability to work from home or on alternate shifts, even if it seems weird to say that a lineman would work from home. Well, if he has to go home on emergency leave, what are some things that he could still do there? Is it safety videos? Is it inventory? Is there other things that people can do that's an alternative to their physical sitting at their desk or writing in their line track? And so that way, if we're locked back down, it's, the public knows we're still here, we're still working, you can still count on us. It's important for us to all find kind of creative ways to work around the obstacles and not give up. And in addition to that, in Washington State, our governor uses his executive authority to prohibit the disconnection of utilities. So even though all the state's PUDs already did this voluntarily, we're running into some pretty significant cash flow issues moving into the cold season, and you have folks that are already like 6 months behind on their bills. So just being able to tap into the resources that are available for customers for rate relief for energy and water assistance programs like LIHEAP and CARES Act funding, and then finding ways to partner with our counties and other agencies, nonprofit agencies, to help support those customers through the hard time is just as important as supporting your employees. And probably always having a plan B and a plan C is the big takeaway from this for my utility, at least.
Absolutely. Well, Daryl, Kristen, and Bruce, thanks so much for sharing your insights on our Future of Leadership panel today. I know this is, I've taken away a lot of different insights from you all, so appreciate your insights and sharing. So now we're going to move into our kind of closing remarks around just what's next and some of the key themes that we're seeing. I'm going to also allow you to help tell us what you think is next. So what technologies are you currently experimenting with in your district? Drones, artificial intelligence, chatbots, virtual reality, augmented reality, 5G, small cell, personalized information delivery. Let us know what you're experimenting with. And basically what I'm going to do is lay out some of the big picture macro trends that we see at Government Technology Magazine, at our Center for Digital Government, some of the things that are coming. So 2020 marks not just a year of a global pandemic or a year of a lot of radical uncertainty, it also marks the dawn of a new decade. And it's the beginning of the next decade. And we expect more exponential change, more progress, but also this new reality that's kind of emerged is this new operating pace. And so we're going to have to be able to operate at a different level and leverage technology and new processes at a different level. So it looks like we've kind of got an even split, but personalized information delivery is one that you're experimenting with right now. So that's, super fascinating. And thank you for sharing that. So what are those technologies that we see? Well, before we get into them, you have to understand that special districts are taking on new roles. So, it's not just special districts as service providers, but now you're designers of services, you're enforcers, you're communicators, you're employers, and your service providers. And you're doing all of these things simultaneously. And so we have to wear not just many hats, but we have to do that proficiently all at the same time with limited resources, limited staff, and navigating the global pandemic as well. So this creates a lot of challenges for us, and it also creates a lot of opportunity. So what are those macro trends that you need to be aware of? Well, I'm going to spend just a couple quick minutes breaking them down for you. The first one is really around the pace of change. So, we've heard the new normal, next normal, new reality. Basically, this mode of operations is our new reality. So the pace of change and how government agencies responded, how special districts responded, is kind of the new expectation that the public has for us with everything going forward. So whether it's fires or some other type of disaster or just behavioral changes that happen because of new things that come out, we have to respond and be able to adapt quicker. And the key theme that I took away today was just that there were many special districts that weathered the storm because they had the infrastructure in place beforehand, whether it was paperless or other things. They really focused on those foundational elements, connectivity, and leveraging them to seamlessly respond and adapt to it. Next is around personalized information delivery, which, ironically was our top poll response from you all as far as what you're doing. And so people are expecting more of that Amazon-esque experience. They want agencies to provide information that's about them. So depending on your function in your special district, they want, you to provide a more personalized level of service where instead of seeing every possible option available to them online, they see specifically what they are interested in based on their data, based on, their activity with your district. And it's also a balancing act because you have to balance the privacy dynamics of it in providing that more seamless experience. But we see this as a huge opportunity. I mean, look at location-based services and how we used to use things like phones and disabled GPS. Well, now, if you want to request an Uber ride or have food delivered to your house, you freely will give away that data for a better experience. So this is part of what we have to prioritize and really look at going forward in special districts. Humanized automated systems. So when you think about what happens, what comes after Siri, what comes after, chatbots and the next evolutionary leap in how we access information, and it's going to be things that are more relatable. We saw an astonishing amount of new technologies that were rolled out that emulate humans that allow you to interact with them. So what's on the screen right now are actually not recorded people. These are AI bots that have been computer generated that can take the place of a chat bot. And so these are new technologies that will increasingly take the role of, that chatbot on your website, that messaging service that you may use on a social media site. People crave contact with other people, and they trust things that look and feel like them. And so expect to see more of these types of technologies roll out, not just at the consumer level, but also with special districts and how they're using things. Next up is around feedback loops and behavior-based design. So basically the premise here is that government agencies today provide feedback when it's legally required oftentimes. So if someone files a Freedom of Information request, you have to reply within a certain amount of time, depending on your state. But what if you provided real-time feedback that was predictive? So I'm filling out a form for new service for a PUD, and I enter my address, and it automatically tells me before I fill out the rest of the form that I'm not in the service area, but here is the actual PUD that serves me. These are the types of leaps that we see when it comes to how we design that more personalized experience, providing things that are really built around our people, the people that we serve, our employees. We call these behavior-based goals, and these are also emerging where instead of trying to get a certain number of people to use a particular service that we have, why not design things for certain behaviors that we want? We want people to be able to use contactless payment within our facilities. We want it to be seamless and easy for them to do. So that's our goal, not numbers, but behaviors. And that's another thing that we see emerging. Zero latency. So over the next decade, connectivity at home will reach that of about 1 terabyte a second. So you can download all 238 episodes of Friends in 1 second, or you can use that to enable and fuel your self-driving vehicles, all kinds of internet connected infrastructure, but it's going to create a lot of new challenges for us, especially with special districts. How do we secure that infrastructure? How do we leverage some of those use cases, whether it's self-driving garbage trucks or whatever it might be? There's going to be this collision of consumer technology and expectations and that we have in the public sector. And so we have to figure out where those meet and how we leverage them collectively together, how we put this new infrastructure to work. Digital and innovation ecosystem. So a lot of what you heard today, were great initiatives that came out of partnership with other agencies, other special districts. This is really the fuel that is going to allow us to more rapidly adapt. We heard from Randy Iwasaki with Contra Costa Transportation Authority earlier. They're doing a number of different innovations, and they do it in partnership with, industry, with other agencies, with regional transportation providers. This is kind of that operating model that we need. We can't go at it alone. We have to partner with industry and other people, even if they're academics and even if they're NGOs or traditional state and local agencies. We need to find ways to leverage that. And then privacy. Privacy continues to be a moving target. We saw GDPR in the UK and kind of the EU emerge as something that really started that conversation here in the United States. California launched their own Consumer Privacy Act. Colorado did the same. Well, now what's happening overseas is they're looking at creating marketplaces for that data where people can monetize their own data. These are citizens that can sell their data to government or industry. So what happens when our states start to enact legislation that does that? How do we enable people to provide information to our special districts? So we start to have to think about how that's going to emerge and the role that we have in protecting that information once we have it. And then lastly, the service law and regulatory APIs. Basically what this means is today, open data is often very unstructured in special districts as well as traditional government agencies. In the future, we see more regulations emerging around how minutes and how different services and laws have to be stored and accessible so that maybe I want to ask my virtual assistant that, now looks like a human, a question about law or regulation. I can actually do that and they can go find the answer for me because there's some regulatory backbone and kind of plumbing in place to do that. So we see these emerging as something that states will start to inevitably standardize as we think about how people access service laws and regulations going forward. So how do you keep up in all of this craziness? Well, number one, you have to understand the bigger picture. Number two, and we heard this a lot today, have a working group, have a way to connect into your employees to empower them to be a part of these exponential changes. Number three, engage partners in this digital ecosystem. Number four, you want to lay a foundation for rapid adaptation. So focus on modernizing things that are legacy inside your organization, whether it's technology, whether it's processes that are outdated, or even reskilling your workforce was a key theme that came out of today. And then lastly, you want to measure your outcomes and analyze them on a regular basis, not once every 5 years, not once every year. You want this to be an iterative process. You're in a state of beta. And so you want to think about adapting and responding to that very, very rapidly going forward. So with that, I want to be respectful of our time. So we're going to have to begin our wrap up here. We've covered so much ground today with our Special District Summit West. We've discussed what we've learned from special district leaders that responded to crisis. We've discussed how employees need to be managed and led differently. We've discussed the future of the special district experience. And we've talked about what comes next. And I'm more inspired than ever about how each of you are not just adapting to change, but you're innovating your way through it. And so a special thanks goes out to all the special district leaders that carved out some time today to speak, as well as our industry partners at AT&T that were able to join in on the conversation and help us understand the bigger picture trends that are happening. I also want to thank our Special District National Advisory Board for their insights, guidance, and help in framing today's discussion. But before we adjourn, I want to share just a couple quick opportunities for you to engage in our program going forward. Firstly, we have a national awards program, and we encourage, all the insights that were being shared on the chat, share them with us on this awards program. Submissions are open until September 25th. There's a link on the screen. We'll send it out as well. We've seen some radical innovations, including a transit district that leveraged buses and even a van fleet to deploy mobile hotspots in underserved areas. So lots of great things coming in. Share them with us because we want to make sure you're recognized for that. And number two, we have a legislative summit that is emerging on September 10th. And so we're going to talk about some of the biggest legislative issues that you need to know about going forward. I put a poll on the screen. If you want to automatically register for this legislative update, let us know. We'll make sure that you're on the list. If not, we totally understand going forward, but we want to make sure you have an opportunity to plug into those updates as we go forward. And also, I just want to spend a moment thanking you, our audience, for carving time out today to join our conversation. We hope that you have been inspired by what you've heard, and we can't wait to see what you do next. And lastly, I'd like to thank our partners at AT&T. Without their support, today's conversation would not be possible. We'll be following up in the coming days with a link to today's event and slides, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great week.